All right, recording. Check, 1, 2, testing, 1, 2. Hi, everyone,
Hello.
and welcome. Maddie, I'll do the intro!
Sorry, I thought we were doing a
All
mic
right,
check.
you son of a bitch. All right, hold on.
Does
3,
my
2.
We were doing a
microphone
mic
work?
check.
Oh, my fuck off. All right. Hello, and welcome to Dragon Breath. I love both of you dearly. I am your host, one of two parts of one beautiful whole of here at Dragon Breath. My name is Christian Sanford, and we have with us the impeccable Evan O'Hara and the delightful Madeline Jerge. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Dragon Breath, a D&D talk show for dungeon masters and for players to talk about things that you might find challenging, things that we find challenging, and we want to talk about it in an open setting and get people a little more comfortable with some maybe more difficult things with Dungeons and Dragons, or giving you as a DM or player tools that you can use to make your game more fun and maybe less scary to run every week, because it can be exhausting to be a DM. Evan was nice enough to start us off with our first one shot. Evan, do you want to talk about the one shot you ran for us?
Absolutely. And normally I would point you towards a link on our Twitch to have you watch the session that we typically like to record, but unfortunately, this one has been lost to time and space and never to be recovered again, unfortunately. So I'll go over a quick synopsis on what we did. So again, each session, each episode, I think we like to go in and explore a very specific idea or mechanic, or again, something to help you make your game better. This one, I had decided to go in and do an idea that I had had for a while, and it wasn't like a grand, huge change to any of the mechanics of the game. But what I liked to do with this session was have all my characters have the same background. Now, this does a few things. Again, well, of us who play 5th edition probably know, but if you're less informed on exactly what that is. Again, you have your class, you have your race, but then in 5th edition, there's the third decision of your background, and it's how do you fit into this world? Are you a scholar? Are you some kind of folk hero, or perhaps a humble merchant before you started your life of adventuring? For this specific adventure, I had everybody do the sailor background. Hooray! And I wanted to explore exactly like how this, as a DM prepping an adventure and how the adventure runs, how is this going to affect things? In my head, when I started doing this, the biggest idea that I had about how this was going to work was that because of the same background, every character has 2 skills that are the same. In this case, they were athletics and perception. And I thought to myself, as well as they had tools and vehicle proficiencies and navigators and vehicles, parentheses, water. And I thought this would be cool because it would allow me to create adventures around the skill sets of my players, and hopefully that it would help me build a better adventure. On the whole, I thought I liked it. There were some things that I wish had gone a little bit better, and maybe that I should have had a little bit more foresight on, but it was really interesting, more than anything else, thematically, right? We got to throw this in, especially I think this worked really well for the kind of one shot that it was. It allowed me to in a way, mitigate this sort of uncomfortable beginning to any campaign, whether it's a long form or short term. You have this sort of like, why are you all like doing the same thing together? I've had so many parties that go in and like, they're like, well, I wouldn't work with this person, or like, that's not what my character would do. But when we all have the same background, it's much easier to sort of bring it in and have this sort of commonality to the party, which I think is really good because, I mean, in the same way, it wasn't limiting, right? Because Christian, Maddie, and Danny, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, you all created some pretty different characters, I think.
Do you want to actually, I think this would be good to just give, because we weren't able to record it, because we don't have anything to reference, do you want to give us like the synopsis of what happened in the session? Give us the story that you would tell as some sort of, tell us a little
Absolutely.
bit about
The party of 3 recruited for their renown and skills on the high sea were brought in for a voyage under a Captain Edmund Saltblood. Bringing in so that they could go towards Stormcaller Island to be able to find the treasure that was hidden there.
And like phone call, not like shirt collar. That needed clarification.
Yes, yeah, like I would call down lightning, Stormcaller. It's actually a fun fact. Actually, I didn't tell you this. Stormcaller was a prestige class in 3.5 of like a storm wizard. And so I actually based it off of that because I had a character that I briefly played like that. Not the point. But anyway, there's The adventure then began with just some casual sea voyaging before the party was subjected to a supernatural storm. I liked this because I think because the whole party had both proficiency in water vehicles as well as athletics, there's this like cool spot where like normally I think a few characters will be suited for this kind of adventure, and then the other two that like might be in this party are now kind of like left out or doing poorly. But here you guys all knew what you were doing, or at least your characters did, so that they could go in and do that. Afterwards, going through the storm into the cemetery of ships, the party navigated the large ship while a little bit damaged through water filled with masts and hulls of boats long forgotten, which eventually became raised in this obscured mist as a ghost ship, right? So luckily, and this was kind of cool, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it might have been Maddie or Danny passed their perception check to sort of see these bits of boat start to disappear from the water, and eventually they saw its culmination in this giant boat, which... And again, the sort of out of left field idea that I hadn't
definitely
considered.
Danny. I had the bright idea of then setting the boat on fire. So, hello.
Well, I mean, it was honestly, I was expecting you guys to go a little bit more like that, but then Danny, of course, took control of the ghost boat by, manning the amulet by which the captain was wearing, very narrowly avoiding a curse thanks to some bardic inspiration from Christian. But then again, managing to get through that and befriending or commandeering the boat, rather, they got to the last part of the adventure, a tower at the top of which the treasure lied. In this, they encountered a water weird, a type of water elemental, a little bit, I think it's a little bit weaker, something that I could throw at you guys without managing to kill you. But again, I think what I was sort of intending with this was it kind of destroyed part of the stairs to the idea that, there are getting up this tower is no longer as simple, especially while fighting this. So, Maddie, you were the one that unfortunately got on the wrong side of the stairs after.
Yeah, I was rolling some doozies, some 1s through 4s throughout the whole game. And to preface
that's the game.
You hate to see it. That's it.
It's the game. It's the game. I definitely out of the foursome have the least experience with D&D. I've only played one shot in the past, but obviously I'm surrounded. I'm now realizing that like everyone that I hold dear in my life loves this game, including the two of you. My boyfriend Corey is playing D&D right now. So he's in 2 campaigns. No, it's a different campaign. You guys play on Sundays. Yeah, this is his Friday night campaign. I don't know.
Oh, he's playing right now. He's in the other room.
He's currently, I can like hear him doing the thing. So I've observed a lot through osmosis. We have the books. It's just like being around it. You feel a lot of it. But yeah, we can get more into this later. But I think it was interesting because I wanted to insert myself, and I thought it was interesting, had this common background, but we all had different types of characters. Like Christian was more of like a strongman type, and Danny was like a cat man that has special stuff going on, and then I was a wizard.
For the listeners at home, he played a monk. I played a multi-class that I realized in hindsight was not very clever. It was a bard barbarian. I had fun with it, but mechanically it does not function well.
I didn't mean to burst your bubble halfway through.
No, that was hilarious. That was amazing. Now, before I think we get too much, because Maddie, I really want to hear about your thoughts. But I think before we do that, I do want to hear, Evan, just how you thought it went in general. Maybe, was there something that didn't go right? Was there something that went very wrong? Tell me how you felt about it.
So like I was saying, when I had first done this, my idea was like, a set of 2 skills that everyone has. That's awesome. Now I can like create adventures that like, showcase this so everybody can like go through and be powerful and like moderately successful. Now the issue though lied in my focus there, because I think we had fun. And like I said, narratively, it made it a lot easier to sort of tie things together and kind of get the show moving. And I think this works really well for a one shot, because you don't need to worry as much about like, why is this wood elf and this like warforge like buddying up right now? You already have that baked into your characters. The issue though was that I was like, yes, perception and athletics. I will try to make as many challenges like based around those skills, or at least have them there. I always forget though that like my players, like it's like the rule of DMing, right? If you make it like this very intricate sort of like way to go through, your players will without a doubt find a different way to do it, right?
There's only so much prep you can actually do before it just
Yeah, right. It's sort of like I can make these things, but when you say, "Oh, I want to go around or try to like do X, Y, or Z in this sort of creative fashion to overcome the obstacle I've put in front of you," that sort of focus of skills doesn't really help as much.
I'll also say, like, as a more inexperienced player, because I couldn't create a character myself, that I wasn't as familiar with the skills of the sailor like you had told me, but it took a lot. I got definitely more confident towards the end of the game. But like if our common denominator is like, let's band together and use these skills because we're all sailors, but like one character doesn't know what they're doing, it's like hard to assert that. So that
now, as a player, this is something Evan and I think about a lot, about how new players engage with content that, because we are so immersed in these experiences and this sort of storytelling, we're not always thinking about what it's like for people very fresh and new to this content to absorb it. So Maddie, can you give us sort of your general feels about how you sort of navigated this? There were things that, you felt either like you didn't understand, or were there things that you're like, wow, I surprisingly got the knack of this without really needing much explanation, or just, general thoughts?
Yeah, I think the beauty of D&D and why I've always had a lot of fun with it is that you automatically, there has to be one person in the room that has played before, because you have to have a DM. So there's someone who's thought about the game before you step in. Maybe all of your players are new, but at least one person is like there for the sole purpose of orchestrating the game. And so what I do a lot is like, let me just ask if this is possible. Like I had a basic background of like, okay, I knew that I had these spells. I had the book next to me. So like as we were playing, I was like, okay, these are the spells that I can choose from. What could work? And so I relied a lot on that in terms of being a wizard of like the spells, but there were other things available to me, just like perception checks of the skills that I had as a sailor that I don't think I relied on as much, just because there's so much content ahead of time. So I wish that I would have prepped more. I think it would have made it more fun. But
I think I think you're thinking of, and tell me if I'm interpreting this wrong, but you're seeing the list of skills as like written out skills that have a written out purpose. Does that make it, like you feel you were understudied with the skills?
Yes. Like if we're in a situation where it's like, oh, you have like in the game when we were in the water tower thing, whatever, there was like a time where there was a gap where the water had blown out the stairs or whatever. And so it's like, okay, you have to be able to do something to get to the other side. So like that was towards the end of the game. So I was like, okay, I could do an athletic thing. I could try to do a spell, but it's hard to know what the optimal choice is and what's going to be the most successful unless you understand the skills and skills ahead of time.
I really think that there is something interesting, I think, on that, right? Because like D&D is such an experiential learn in the sense that like, I don't really know anybody who picked up a D&D book and just learned it, right?
Right.
Right. Like by either playing and seeing somebody do that. And that's why I was very
happy. I definitely by the end, I felt more comfortable with it. At the beginning, and I could tell, like, because you guys are so nice, and Danny too, because he's an experienced DM, but even as a player, like wanting to include me in the action and being like,
yes,
Zelda, who's my character's name, like, what would you like to do? And if that hadn't happened, like, I think if there wasn't that camaraderie, I didn't even know that you took turns in like there's so much that I didn't know that like if no one had offered that to me, I would have just been like, I'm here.
I think something a lot of this is something that took me a while to actually start doing as a DM, is to literally stop gameplay sometimes and just go, hey, did everybody get in action? Like sometimes things move so quick, it is okay as a dungeon master to suddenly go, hold on. Okay, I just want to make sure because, let's say Danny really took the reins in these last 20 minutes. He's really piloting the party. Hold on. Maddie, does your character want to do anything right now? Like that's, as a DM, such an important tool, and your players aren't going to get mad at you for stopping to make sure everybody's playing and engaging. And something I also like to tell my players is there's no wrong way to engage with the material as long as you are engaging with it. You can be an active listener and still be engaging. Like I have plenty of players who just sit and listen, and that's what they like. They don't necessarily like being as active. There are people who are watching and absorbing, and then there are people who are being more active. I think it's awesome that you were so eager to try and be active, and you did a really good job. This is something players can do more, is communicate directly to your DM like, hey, I'm trying to do an action. Because I remember playing, you were like, we were on the boat, and you're like, I have spells. I want to cast spells. When do I cast the spell? And that's something, tell your DMs that you're like, I'm ready to do something. And your DM will be like, got it. Okay, here's the, here the skeletons are climbing up the side of the boat,
Yeah, I think the thing that I struggle with most in D&D, I love like the narrative aspect, and I know the point of this one shot was showing more of the technical aspects of the game, which I think is really cool. But the thing that I struggle with, especially with, I've never played a long form campaign, so maybe this is different, and that's probably why people like it more, to be honest, is like during these one shots, and this happened in our last one shot as well that we played, is like it almost seems like, Evan, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the way that you structured the game, it was kind of like a 3-act narrative of like you have the beginning at the bar, and then we had the middle kind of on the boat during the journey, and then we had the end portion with the water thing. So like that was very apparent during the thing, but like we spent almost an hour at the bar, and it was super fun and it was funny, and there was a whole side thing where like Danny's character got kicked in the nuts and like Christian's character was singing. Like it was really fun. Like I'm glad that we did that, but like that took a long time. And then when we were in the action sequences, it takes so long to do each turn because it's like you're rolling to be like, lifted my hand, and then I like, that's what I struggle with D&D, because I'm like, let's just get to it. Let's get back to the narrative. Like, why are we spending hours and hours to be like, he punched me, because you have to roll the dice like 12 times.
To interject really quickly, there are other tabletop role-playing games that take a lot of that out. Dungeons and Dragons, as much as we talk about it, I really think there is tabletop role-playing for everyone. If you just want to get to the story, something I really like, I've seen folks on Critical Role that do.
If I'm like hijacking this whole conversation,
no. This is what we're here for.
Yes. Okay, good.
But just like to tell you, Maddie, there are tabletop role-playing games that sort of take that out, that really make each encounter just simple skill checks. So, for instance, it's the same sort of concept of my character does blank, and that's really the only thing you need to know how to play. There's a honey heist, which is a great example of you have 2 stats. Anytime you do something like a bear would do, you roll.
Oh, it's bears. I was thinking like honey.
It's the concept. You could do a longer role-playing version of this, but the concept of the game is everybody is met to steal honey, and there's like a DM's board where you roll up a bunch of random parts of the encounter, and you are bears stealing honey, and it's there are simpler ways to do that. And I think
I thought this was like a pimp situation.
No, for Dungeons and Dragons, and I think tell me how you do your sessions, Evan, but I try to run mine about 30% combat, 70% out of combat. So like I don't emphasize as much on combat in my longer campaigns. Like the past 2 sessions I've run with you, Evan, have been, I think that combat we had in our last session was the first combat we had in almost a session and a half.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's good. I think on the whole, I like combat, but even when I do it, I think I try to keep my combat brief, because I feel like, sort of, Maddie, like I feel you on the idea that I feel sometimes when you're in combat, it's like, especially sometimes it just drags on, where you're like, oh, you missed, or you did this, or you did, like, it just kind of goes on and on and on. And I don't feel like a lot happens there. So I will say that, like, I like to insert combat into most of my into my sessions, but a lot of the time I like to make the combat almost like another puzzle itself. Like, for example, that was kind of what the water weird was like meant to be. I think I should have put a little bit more into it, but the idea of like sort of destroying the stairs, right, was like more about, how can I make this less of just like a fight, but now it's like, oh, I have to worry about like this obstacle around me and this kinds of stuff. Like, so I either like to keep them short or keep it dynamic in a way, if that makes sense.
I'm definitely a fan of that. I think it's also like a pacing thing, and maybe this is just because I'm new, but when you're having more of like a dialogue situation, which is what we were doing at the beginning, or even like when we first got on the ship and it was like we spent a lot of time just like walking around the ship and like talking to people and like, do you want to get to know the captain and stuff like that? Like that's maybe this might be like a male female thing too, not to like dwell on that too much, but I think like women more naturally are just more drawn to like relationship building and language and communication.
My favorite part of Dungeons and Dragons is absolutely
this is not on the whole.
So, yeah,
that might be your feminine side.
But this might be a good chance to talk about that as well. That there are very much two modes of play in Dungeons and Dragons. There's combat and non-combat. And I think as you're looking at it from a gaming sense point, we are role playing to fish out specific information. So like this is something that I think newer players have a harder. You can have intention. Like Christian the player wants to know, is there any like what information is there to gather about our quest? So we know the quest is we're going to Collar Island. So Danny and I were thinking, let's talk to the bar to figure out what information we can learn before we go there. And like what makes Dungeons and Dragons fun and exciting is that you get to role play that. It's not like I just sit and ask the DM, go, so is it dangerous? What kind of monsters are on the way there? You have to then take on a persona and engage with the world a little more directly. And I think sometimes that's a little more abstract for players to learn about engaging through the lens of your character.
I think with that especially, I think when people ask me that, like when you have new players, they're like, if like you or I, if we wanted to go get information on some like seafaring something or another, we would know that like my character wants to head down to the harbor and like find, the roughest saloon and try to do this, right? But if I have a player who's like, hey, like I'm trying to figure out X, and that's what my character wants to do, again, like, or like, is it dangerous, or like what's out there? I think you're right that that's a really good thing to like explicitly say. And then me as the DM, I can say, okay, through like a little bit of hearsay, blah, 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 you find yourself at the tavern or at the home of like this like fortune teller so she can help you or something like that.
As players, you can always go, hey, I want to know more about this. I have no idea how my player would ask it or go about, like the DM wants to help you find that information and they can kind of lead your hand to the role-playing encounter where you get that.
How do you guys feel? Now I'm going to ask you guys questions.
Yes,
how do you
please.
guys feel as DMs when the players like conspire in the like breaking the fourth wall? Like if the group of players were like, we want to do this.
I love it because I'm taking notes. I'm planning. I'm like, because that helps me plan my session. The players are saying, we now have intention. We have direction. DM, this is what you need to prepare for. Like players that can stop to communicate that. Now there is some extent where I definitely pump the brakes on it, where like if it's in combat and they're like metagaming to the point where it's like, I'm like, okay, you guys can't talk about this now. You could have talked about it maybe before you engaged with the enemy or the monster or whatever. But in the heat of the battle, I usually keep the table talking to a minimum.
So actually this is something, and we can actually even roll this into the something cool that happened recently. That's actually a whole concept that I really like, is the idea of like, if you want to like metagame, like, or you want to like optimize your play, you can role play that out, right? Yeah. By being like, let's say you're like in a travel montage and you're like resting and you're like, hey, wizard, I'm a fighter. Like there's this one thing you did once. Like, what if we do these things together and you try it out? Or sometimes they happen naturally, much like in our last session with you, Christian, I used a spell that I hadn't used before, which was Gust of Wind. So I made this like huge like tunnel, like wind tunnel, literally. And then we had a Warforged, who I believe is a paladin, get in front of it and sort of ride the wind to sort of like make his strike stronger and like, just sort of be caught by the wind and throw in. There was a check that was involved, so it like might have gone wrong, but there's now this idea of this sort of like, hey, team move, like I've got the Gust of Wind up, and you can try that, or you can do it like out of combat or whatever, right?
And I think
that's cool.
This is where you hear a lot of DMs talk about rule of cool, right? So a lot of DMs play this rule where it's like there's no rules for sliding into attack using gust of wind. That is players going, this would be cool, right? And then I as the DM have to go, yeah, that would be. I will let you try to do that. How would that work mechanically?
Yeah.
So
Evan definitely did that well, I feel like, in our game, because there were a lot of times I feel like Danny was a little bit of a trickster, and he was trying to do some stuff, and then I obviously just have no idea what's happening.
Why do you think he's a trickster for playing that way? I'm genuinely curious, like why you use that word in particular, trickster. Just like a goofy sort of thing, or do you mean like he's tricking Evan as the DM?
No, it was more of just like a a goofy, like, we want to make this an entertaining, fun game.
And you can always do that. How cool is that?
It's just fun. It was cool. It's not. I don't say trickster in a negative connotation at all, or like underhanded or that sort of thing. It was like, I'm thinking about the scene when we were at the pub and we were trying to, and I had gone to bed because, to be honest with you guys, now that we're talking about it, I was like, I don't know what to do, so I can stall the game by putting my character to bed, and it worked out perfectly. Because then I could like study my little sheet and the book while you guys were playing, and then I was like, okay, I can do this. But during that time, like there was a whole side thing where he was like talking to this lady, and I could tell because that character showed up later that Evan had placed her as the DM because there was something about that character, but it was like Danny kind of turned it into something else. And there was like when he jumped on the ship and stuff, like there was things that I think he was like trying to do with his character, and obviously the cat character that he was a little bit more like, that was part of the character too, was he's like, I'm kind of a wild and crazy guy. So like it was, I think, a lot of factors there.
Were you more comfortable about maybe potentially trying, more expressive role play, being around two people? And Danny and I both did voices, and can you talk about a little bit just that experience about like what it was like to be, surrounded by people deeply role playing, or like taking the role play more?
I think it was really cool. To be honest, it's just a factor. Like Evan and I had like an hour prep call where we like made my character and we're just like talking, not about the campaign, but just about like, what is this, like, I chose to become a wizard, so it's like, what does that mean in terms of spells and things like this? But at no point in time, and I didn't know that people did voices in D&D. I don't know why I never thought that. It just didn't really cross my mind that people actually like physically role played during it. So that's why I think I was a little taken off guard, because I was like, oh, I know it's a role playing game and you're creating a character, but I didn't know that people did it that way, and that was part of the fun. So I think in the future, I think it's really fun. It just wasn't something that I was prepared for at the time. Like I barely was like, this is the name of my character, so that's like another step of playing the game. But like looking back on it, I'm like, that's the fun part. A
couple notes I want to hit on before we move to sort of like closing comments, because we're approaching a half hour here. A couple things I want to point out for our DMs listening is Maddie has played one other session of Dungeons and Dragons, and she's telling us that she had a decent amount of fun, that it was an exciting experience, that it opened her up to new things, to things that might allow her to be expressive. And if you're a DM and you have someone who's a new player and you're worried, how am I going to help this person through here, is like, it really takes very little. You can lead by example. You can check in and ask your players directly what's happening, what's going on. You can give them encounters that force them to think about their features and abilities and spells more creatively. Maddie, you had some awesome, for second time player, the way you were thinking about using your spells that are outside of the wording on the page, that's super exciting. And not to steal Evan's thunder too much here, but Evan, really what you prepared to prepare a well over 2 hour, we ended up going a little over 2 hours. Oops. You prepared a bar, a boat, and a tower. Now, if you're a DM, that is, if you're counting, he only had 2 NPCs. He had one monster that we saw, but it was a dynamic one shot. And you shouldn't be scared as a DM to run these things, because that's how much you have to prepare per session, right? If you're really thinking about it mechanically, how much do I as a DM have to do something like this? It really is It's not that much.
My biggest thing, and like this is more so I think with less like destination driven adventures, but have like just picture as a DM your biggest factors, right? You have the 2 NPCs, you have the boat, and you have the enemies and like the locations, right? If you start getting too into the nitty gritty of it, you know, your player's gonna like skip over the trigger for this like paragraph description you had, and then that's gone to waste, but then they have found something else. So being able to think on your feet with the sort of factors in play, that's how I always approach my DM.
And have fun with it. It is a game. Like if you're like, this is like, and someone sort of throws you a curveball, you as the DM can have as much fun. Like don't feel stuck in whatever you prepared. Like you can totally pivot. Like Evan, you actually cut an encounter out almost entirely, right?
Yeah, so, there were going to be skeletons on your boat, but then we were running out of time, so I was like, we'll just make the ghost boat and have some ghost skeletons on there. You know.
Do we have any final thoughts? Any sort of larger things before I sort of like pitch and talk about our next episode?
Yeah, I think my final thoughts, it definitely was super fun. I think I agree with all of what you said, Christian, that it doesn't, I definitely would say a minimal level of like what Evan did with me of like understanding the character sheet and like what a role is. Like it sounds really stupid because obviously the audience for this podcast is people that are more experienced with D&D,
this is all helpful. Yeah,
that was very helpful for me, and it wasn't overly like prescriptive of like this is what you should do, but there was a baseline of I was like, it was very digestible because I was like, I know I have these 8 spells and the mechanics were kind of spelled out for me, but then there was enough choice involved within the guardrails that I felt that I could do it. And then I think the biggest thing was just like with some of the spells, like I didn't know that when it says how long the spells last, it's like in the game time, not
that's right, I forgot. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's
the timer. I thought that's what it was. So that was an example of me being like, ooh, I think I'm being sneaky because this lasts an hour and that's how long we're playing. But in actuality, it's an hour in the game. But, you know, I just kind of was like out of character being like, Evan, I want to do this. Can I do this? And he was like, LOL, no, but good try. So like that was just fun from like a me learning perspective and I can see how if you have more experienced players and you're a more experienced DM and you've used these spells over and over, whatever you're doing, I could see how it's like refreshing to have someone new be like, oh, it's not exactly how it is on the page, but like we're going to try it. And that's kind of a fun dynamic. But I had a lot of fun. I think the world building stuff is really cool. I liked the sailor. I'm not like a real sci-fi person, just like in general, but I think like the sailor concept, that was something that it's not foreign to me. So I think with like new players, like maybe don't give them a campaign where it's like, if everyone has the same background, which was kind of the crux of this campaign, like sailors exist in real life, I can understand that versus something that's like, I don't know, dragon slaying, whatever other thing.
If you have a group of friends who like your commonality is maybe a singular thing, that could be a great way to introduce that group of friends to Dungeons and Dragons. If you guys are all, you know, let's I don't know, you're all in a pottery class together. Yeah, you're all in a pottery class and you do a guild artisan background campaign. That could be super fun.
Yeah,
so with the rest of the time we have, I want to sort of prep our next episode. So Evan DM'd this one shot. I will be DMing the next one. And I'm really excited because I get to try and beat the crap out of my least favorite class to run. So something I as a DM have never had a fun time running, at least because I've run quite a few one-shots. I feel like every time I run a one-shot with a monk in it, it's always I get my ass handed to me. The monk whoops my butt as the DM every session. And anecdotal story. I went to like a local game shop and I did the whole like, I'll just run a game. They give you like a discount if you run a game at the store, but I just wanted to like run some D&D. So I went to run a D&D. It was a wicked cool little like 3 challenge, one shot in hell. They were trying to like escape hell. Like this demon was torturing people with fun games to try and get through his, you know, it's kind of Saw-esque, whatever. Anyways, I had 2 monks in the party and it was miserable. I made the mistake. I had a player say to me, he's like, "This is why you can't run one bad guy against monks. You're gonna get fucked." It was just like, because the way monks can control combat encounters, it can be difficult as a DM to find ways to challenge them. If your monsters are stunned every turn and your party has a higher damage output, the encounter can be over before you get to use any of the mechanics that make the encounter challenging or interesting. And I personally, this is something I want to address directly as I run the session, is find ways to force monks to use their abilities so that they can't stun my enemies. And find ways to challenge what I think, because a stun in a session, because then it is a full round of everybody gets to clobber the shit out of your thing, usually with advantage, which means you're rolling twice. So I'm hoping to do some sort of gauntlet challenge. Oh, I also think it's worth noting that if you are wondering, we are running these one-shots at 5th level. That's where I think Evan and I have kind of agreed that we're going to be running. Maddie.
Yeah, unless it like benefits or is necessary for the specific thing that we're looking into. Fifth level is sort of where we're trying to aim.
So next session, my goal is to be, how do I challenge the monk who's good at everything? It's like certain classes like Rogue and Bard, like, did you unlock the lock? It's like, I don't know, I rolled a 34. Does that unlock it? You're like,
see, I get that joke because now I know what a 34 means.
Yeah, exactly.
Before this, I did not know.
Nearly impossible. So monks do a lot of that in combat. Bards and rogues out of combat are rolling with a +11 on some things, which is like, if you roll a 19, it's like, well, fuck. That's a 30. Yeah, I think you got it. So I'm hoping to challenge the monks in other ways that I can use, like the environment to explore that, and what you as a DM can do. Like, if you have a monk that is clobbering every physical combat encounter, I'm hoping this will help you out, that we can explore all of that. I don't know. This was an awesome. Thank you guys for coming on. Maddie, is there anything that you want to tell DMs about being a new player that you want them to know? Or Evan, is there something as a DM you want to tell other DMs before we do our farewells and goodbyes?
I mean, my message to other DMs is worry less. Again, there's so much, I think, emphasis put into prep work, and like, especially when you look at like the published books, and then on top of that, when you see people who are like professionally doing it and they have all these things like prepared, I think you just need to remember to like relax.
Oh God, you're not Matt Mercer. You are not. This is not. Have fun, relax. It does not take as much work as you think.
Yeah.
And hopefully we're helping our DMs do that. Thank you, Maddie, for joining us. Evan, beautiful as always. I'm going to send us out here. Thank you so much for tuning in to Dragon Breath. This is an awesome experience. Play more Dungeons & Dragons. Do not be scared to DM. We need more people running games of Dungeons & Dragons. This is a game that is good for mind, body, and soul. And you'll be able to find this and our next episode soon on our website, which we're getting to. Give us a minute. Love you guys. Thank you for listening. And play more D&D. Good night.
Bye now.